Hello, everybody, and welcome to Top 5. This is the show where I give you guys a top 5 in the area of progressive rock. These topics are usually generated by my wife, and I just give the thoughts off the top of my head of what I think would make a great top 5 list, my 5 favorites. Nothing definitive, nothing, super researched or put together. This is just me off the cuff, explaining what I love and just coming up with some favorites and opening it up to you guys in the comments to put in your favorites for this particular topic. And this was a little bit of a last minute addition. I wasn't even going to put out a top 5 this week because there's a lot going on in terms of, a bit of a holiday weekend for us in the US with 4th of July. But I thought 4th of July was kind of the perfect opportunity to do an American themed type top 5. So I'm doing the top 5 American prog bands, which is a passion of mine. I really love American bands, of course, being from the US, and I think a lot of American prog bands get a bit overlooked in favor of the scene in like the UK, and nowadays in like Norway and Sweden, and those areas have a pretty vibrant scene. In Italy, of course, there's a great vibrant prog scene, but I feel like the US gets a little bit left behind sometimes, and there's some fantastic bands that have come from the US, especially in the more modern era of prog. So I'm going to do this pretty quickly and just gush about some of my favorite bands for a bit and open it up to you guys in the comments to talk about your favorite American prog bands. So some honorable mentions, as I tend to do. I love the band Is, a New York-based group that are just fantastic symphonic prog with a really quirky style. They've been around for quite some time. I saw them live back in the early days and have always been a fan of theirs and think that they're way underrated. They need to be heard, and I think they're a fantastic group, so check them out. Thank You Scientist is a fantastic prog group, more in the jazz fusion style vein, more recent. They've come to fruition probably in the last 10-15 years, but they're a fantastic group that I absolutely adore. Dixie Dregs, delving a little bit back into the past, is another great progressive band that blends genres, fusion, jazzy styles, country in the mix sometimes, bluegrass, but all instrumental and all really expertly played by some of the top tier musicians. So really fun. I love Fido and his projects. He's from the US. I feel like I've been talking about Fido a lot in these past few weeks, but he's a fantastic artist that really brings together a great combination of sounds that harken back to the classic era, but do it in an artful, more modern approach. And a little bit of a duology here. Maybe they're not traditional prog, but they're some of my favorite bands from the US. Dirt Poor Robins, a fantastic husband-wife duo that just performs some incredible cinematic rock that's just beautiful. And Reign of Kindo, who are an incredible, more jazz-inspired band that just have so many cool, interesting moments and very energetic playing and have some poppier elements in their sound, but they never forget the more jazzy, proggy stuff also. So some of my favorite groups there. But getting into the top 5 proper, at number 5 I have Echolyn, a fantastic prog band, eclectic prog, symphonic prog, whatever you want to call it. They've been around since like the early 90s. And they're just a fantastic group that I've always loved. And they have quite an evolution throughout the years. I feel like their early sound was a bit more raw, a bit more quirky and eclectic. But they've matured somewhat throughout the years and have just delivered some really artful albums that are just beautiful and have some great melodies, and they have their own signature style that's hard to describe. They have this bit of Americana baked into their music, but it's definitely proggy and quirky also. They hopefully have a new album coming out towards the end of this year. It sounds like they've been working on it for quite some time. I loved their album, their Windows album. I don't believe it has a title, or it's self-titled, from I believe 2012. Is one of my favorite albums of all time. I just really think it's expertly crafted. There's some lengthy pieces on it that really work well for me, and just great melodies and beautifully constructed pieces of music. They're just expert songwriters and have such a great style. At number 4, I have Dream Theater, who are a band I've always loved. They were right at the forefront of my love of modern progressive rock. When I first tried them out, I thought they were a bit too heavy for my taste, but I was all on board once I heard Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from Memory. It was just a done deal. I love their quirky approach, that they do have this metal foundation, but they're willing to do very proggy instrumentation over top of it. And I feel like they're pretty diverse at times. You know, they can go into a more poppier direction for certain tracks or for a nice, more mellow ballad, but then they could get really heavy, harsh metal in certain sections, and they can go full out prog and just have these big, epic prog pieces. You know, they've been around since the 80s. They really changed the game, in my opinion, with Images and Words back in the early 90s. I think that inspired so many prog bands to come. So they're really one of the biggest champions for the modern scene of progressive rock and progressive metal. And I feel like for a certain era through the 2000s, you couldn't find a progressive metal band that didn't sound almost just like Dream Theater or have a heavy Dream Theater style influence. So they're super influential to the genre, and just one of the premier bands that have able to get a little bit of bigger, wider acclaim than a lot of these other more obscure acts that I tend to talk about. So good on them, and really championing the progressive rock flag, I think. Next we have more of an obscure band, but I just love them to death, so I had to slot them in here on this list. It's the Deer Hunter at number 3. And yeah, that could be argued, are they really progressive rock? You know, they dabble with prog, but they dabble in indie rock, they dabble in alternative, they dabble in more of a classic rock style perhaps. But I think that's what makes them prog, is they dabble in all these different styles and bring them all together in a very unique, classic, cool way. And bringing together these concept albums, they tell stories, and they're able to shift their sound so dramatically, but still sound like them at their core. Like their Antimai album that came out last year just sounded so different from the Axe series. They really infused this bit of funkiness and jazziness to their style, but it really worked, and it was just really fun to listen to and gave them a new vibrancy and a new freshness to their sound. And they're always able to do that. They're always able to infuse these different styles to just enhance their already existing great sound base. So really in love with them. I can't champion them enough on this channel, as I'm sure you know if you watch a lot of my videos. Definitely go check them out if you haven't yet. One of the premier bands that exists out there in any genre. You know, it's probably hard to pigeonhole them just into one genre, which I think is one of their strengths, because they're more diverse and more creative than that. So I think that's really cool. Number 2, I had to put some kind of older school band on this list, or else, you know, what's the point, right? So I slotted in Kansas at number 2. To me, they're the premier classic progressive rock band from the US. And some people may not even view them as a prog band if you don't know them beyond like just their few hits. But if you listen to their classic albums from the 70s, they're full on prog. They're some of the most proggy albums that existed at the time. And they were able to do so many interesting creative things. They had an incredible lead vocalist. They had violin work that brought in a new dimension to their sound and brought more of this American edge to what was decidedly a mostly UK-based type of music back then, I think, for a lot of people. Even though there were scenes popping up in other places, for the traditional mainstream prog fan in the like US, UK area, they probably knew the UK groups, you know, Genesis, Yes, you know, Gentle Giant even, in more of a obscure way, but even they were probably more wider known in the prog scene. Pink Floyd, all of that stuff. There's just such a vibrant scene in the UK, and so it was really exciting to see that there was a US-based group. And I know there's other classic US-based groups that aren't on this list that I'm sure many of you will mention in the comments. So it definitely wasn't the only prog band in the US, but to me, they really were champions for the US-based prog acts, and I think they really did an incredible job crafting their own sound that really blended some cool progressive rock elements with some more classic rock vibes, and it really worked. And number 1, of course, this is my channel, so this is always tends to be what tops my list. And it's tough to differentiate here, but I'm picking Neal Morse Band, I think. It was between Neal Morse Band and Spock's Beard, which to me, you know, really it all boils down to Neal Morse and his projects and what he does as an artist. So really you could consider this to be Neal Morse writ large, but if I'm just picking a singular band, I think right now the Neal Morse band is what's really exciting to me, and what they're doing. Their last few albums have just been really incredible. Similitude of a Dream, Great Adventure, Innocence in Danger, just top tier progressive rock, unlike what a lot of other bands are able to do. Just really expertly crafted. They're expert players. Neal Morse, Mike Portnoy, Bill Hubauer, Eric Gillette, Randy George. They're just masters at their instruments. They come off incredible live. They're brilliant. And I just think they're just such a fun group. They're able to craft such interesting, intricate, fun, progressive rock. And I know a lot of people have their hang-ups about Neal Morse, about his more religious-themed lyrics and his journey, and how, maybe his song structures and sound could sound a bit overdone, and he follows a formula and all that stuff. But what a formula. He's just really talented at what he does, brings a whole host of emotion to the plate, and assembles these musicians who are just experts at their field and just craft such brilliantly composed music. And the classic era of Spock's Beard, I think, is right up there as well. I didn't include Spock's Beard only because there's been so much change over the eras that, for me, the real clear part of Spock's Beard that is classic to me is that Neal Morse era, back in those first 6 albums. Even though I've followed them and love what they've done afterwards also, I feel like when I'm looking at bands that are making a mark currently, I feel like Neal Morse Band is taking that flag and running with it for this style of progressive rock that Neal Morse really conveys and just really speaks to me. So, but Spock's Beard is right up there on my list too, so you can kind of consider them co-winners of this top 5 list. So thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully this wasn't too oddball and random. For those in the US, enjoy your 4th of July holidays and Independence Day and all of that stuff. And just keep progging out. Keep enjoying the music out there. Thank you guys for joining me, and hopefully I'll catch you in a future episode. Bye, everybody.